podcast is real life stories from everyday people recovering from substance or behavioural addictions. Please visit the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for social media links and a range of books by your podcast host and author, Ren Coy.
Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 42. This is actually a special COVID-19 coronavirus conversation with my mate Charlie S. We put the world to rights in this conversation, discussing where we think the problem emanates from, and we discussed the relevancy of addiction in these unprecedented times and how the 12 steps can be an antidote to the fear and panic experienced during this pandemic. So definitely a relevant conversation, and I just really enjoy speaking with Charlie, so I took the opportunity to have another hour conversation with him. I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed speaking with Charlie. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your app, and also visit patreon.com/lifeinrecovery to support the podcast financially if you can. And please visit lifeinrecovery.co.uk for all my books. And if you go to the website right now, you can actually read the books for free. Every single one of them. I've uploaded the full PDF for people to read. And I'll keep them up there until this pandemic is over. So I hope you enjoy reading the books. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you email me, rencoy@lifeinrecovery.co.uk, I will endeavour to respond as soon as I can. So without further ado, I give you Charlie S. The isolation isn't that much of a stress because I've been pretty much in the house for the last month due to the baby being born anyway.
Sure.
So it's not been that much of not a huge difference, but I get to go out and walk the dog a couple of times a day. And I've got my work to keep me sane. So I think that was kind of what I wanted to talk about really today was just having an enforced period of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the people that that I'm in contact with regularly, those that are in 12-step fellowships and and have a program and are working that 12-step program, they seem to be staying fairly sane, whereas those people who don't have any sort of program or any kind of spiritual life seem to be really struggling, and it's quite a stark contrast. And I just wondered what your thoughts on that were.
I pretty much the same observation, Ren. It seems that the centeredness provided to us by 12 steps is an antidote to the fear and anxiety that seems to be a malaise that's settled down upon almost everybody else. So I think we're quite fortunate in that respect. So yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely the case.
Yeah, I bumped into one of my neighbours a couple of days ago, and I was we were talking outside the house, and we were both saying that their alcohol intake and their intake of sugary and high carb foods had massively increased, and that they were both feeling quite down, and they were just kind of like they were going out for a walk, so obviously to feel better, but they kind of made a bit of a joke about it, but I could kind of see the stress in their eyes, and the fear. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because I didn't want to stand there and say, well, I'm absolutely fine. I didn't want to come across as being a bit of an arrogant dick, really. But the reality is, I am actually okay. There's such a massive merit to getting up every morning and having like a routine with the meditation and the prayer and the readings, and And that kind of sets me up for my day, and also remaining grateful. Like I write a gratitude list every evening before I go to bed, and it reminds me of all the things that I've got in my life and not the things that have been taken away.
Well, quite. I live alone, and so there was an initial adaptation period, but I'm kind of treating it like a retreat, Ren. I'm immersed deeply in my readings and my practice, and it's actually provided an opportunity to go deeper than I would ever be able to do in ordinary daily life, and to get to somewhere approximating a retreat type experience. And so it's my I feel a lot of sadness and compassion for people generally in respect of the amount that they're suffering, which is plain to see. And but on a personal level, save for the frustration and anger I do sometimes feel about the response to the crisis, which, just in my opinion, is disproportionate, I feel, and I believe that the medicine might be more harmful than the ailment. Otherwise, I am very settled in my space. The work we do in 12 steps is largely oriented towards being okay with oneself, isn't it? So these circumstances are actually a litmus test of the progress that I've made in that regard, and I'm absolutely comfortable reading my books, meditating, reflecting, contemplating, doing some work to carry on earning a living. And as you said, the gratitude arises spontaneously just for being alive, Ren. It's always remarkable, regardless of the circumstances that are surrounding me. It is always remarkable. That doesn't change, that basic fact,
Yeah. What did you mean by the medicine is more harmful, Charlie?
So I feel, rightly or wrongly, that there is a risk inherent in being alive here day to day. It's unavoidable to a certain extent, and I would prefer for people to be given a more autonomous decision-making capacity in terms of whether or not they expose themselves to the risks that are out there, in consultation with their loved ones. And the lockdown on the economy and the lockdown on people's capacity to socially interact and move freely and participate in their lives as they normally would could, in my opinion, in the longer term, depending upon how long the situation lasts, prove more harmful than had we carried on with something resembling normality. So I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I felt there was an analogy to be made to a wartime situation, which I know is possibly a bit of an extreme comparison. But in those circumstances, as a society, historically, we would prioritise protecting the vulnerable and women and children, and young, fit men would be sent off to fight. And so my analogy was let's get the young, fit men out there working and keep the economy working at least 20% of its usual capacity, so that the devastation that follows this period is mitigated somewhat. And I appreciate that might seem to be a callous view of things, but I'm just mindful of the impacts that is going to be had upon people's lives in the longer term, and that's those are the conclusions that I've arrived at. So, what are your thoughts on all that, Ren?
Yeah, some part way towards what you're saying. I think that it should probably be a choice, really, for those people that aren't in the vulnerable category. I think the difficulty is it doesn't really seem to be that much known about the virus, in terms of, like, you don't know whether you're going to get mild symptoms or extreme symptoms, and they don't actually seem to know what exactly it is doing. I mean, is it just compromising? Like, I kind of get the feeling that it's, if you've got kind of mucus on your chest, it turns the mucus hard, which creates breathing problems, and anybody could be in that position, I suppose.
True.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one, really. I appreciate where you're coming from, that the aftermath of this crisis is going to be probably worse financially and economically for the entire globe than the current situation.
That's my basic analysis of the situation. Yeah, I am. Obviously, there's a very credible argument to be made for the regime that's been implemented at the moment, and from a compassionate standpoint, it's difficult to formulate a rebuttal of it. I just wonder if we've a tendency in our society to be reflexively compassionate, as opposed to combining compassion with, reason, rationale, logic, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I may well be well adrift in my analysis of the situation. Remember, that's what it is for what it's worth. And
philosophically, there is the part of me that thinks that this needs to happen anyway. I mean,
yes.
a line that I quoted to my partner the other day was from The Matrix, when the agent speaks to Neo and he says that human beings are a virus on this earth. And the reason why I quoted that was because we were talking about the positive effect already within the space of a few weeks and a few months in other countries that it's had on the ozone layer.
Yes.
And rivers around the world, and
Yes.
apparently the whole of Venice is completely cleared up. All the water in Venice is completely clear. They've got dolphins swimming in the water there. And that's absolutely astounding to me, that in such a short space of time, and when human beings grind to a halt, that's the positive effect that it has on the earth, which really, really highlights what a negative effect we are having on the globe, which we're all aware of, but we kind of carry on regardless, blissfully unaware on a day-to-day basis of the terrible effect that we're having on the whole of the planet.
Indeed, and I suppose it's revealed the extent to which our collective greed and sense of entitlement, I think it would be fair to say, has upon our immediate environment. And as you say, perhaps this episode will lead to something approximating a reappraisal of our expectations and the conduct that follows from it as a consequence. And that being the case, then there truly are positives to be gleaned from it. And it certainly helped me to reframe my perspective in terms of what's important and what is not, in terms of the sort of personal aspirations that I have, which are not harmful in and of themselves, as being secondary to the simple things which matter. Time with family, time with friends, the privilege of going to an AA meeting. To really recognise what a privilege that is, having been to plenty of Zoom meetings, as I'm sure you have, which are helpful. They're great.
Yeah.
But they're no substitute, in my view, for actually getting everybody together in a room.
The live show.
The live show, yeah, it is. A lot of the meeting experience is a felt experience, a deeply felt experience, and at least some of that is lost in the Zoom format, I feel. Not all of it, as we can probably feel now talking on this format, there's still a connection. But I think that it is lessened in its impact through this kind of format. And it's just something like the opportunity to go and play football, Ren, as opposed to running on my own. These things that I appreciated deeply before this crisis unfolded, but I suppose it is emphasised the value these simple things have in life, and as clarified that my personal aspirations are really secondary to that kind of stuff, or ought to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the shocking thing about this whole situation is that it isn't really that bad either. It's like the potential death toll, I think, is going to be in the region of around 1 million out of 8 billion people, and the fact is that the virus doesn't kill anywhere near 50% of people. Imagine if we had a situation where you had a virus that killed 50% of the people that it came into contact with. You'd literally have very, very quickly a kind of Walking Dead type scenario, I believe, where the world would completely lose its shit. Because everybody panicked initially. Everybody lost their head. Well, the vast majority of people lost their head initially, and I think we talked about this on the last podcast, actually, that it was a fear-based response. And it clearly indicated that there needs to be a fundamental shift from fear to faith.
Yes.
But how that happens is a really big question, because I don't think the vast majority of people, are really in that mind space. I don't think it's even a consideration, really. What do you think?
I was reflected upon your very statement in that podcast when this all kicked off, just to how accurate you were in terms of the reaction to all of this being utterly rooted in fear consciousness. And I just to transition from that to a faith-based consciousness for us in 12-step fellowships is usually precipitated by a rock bottom, an admission of absolute powerlessness, and a complete inability to solve with one's personal will the problems one faces. And I don't see that in people generally as being at that place. They're very frightened, but there's still the expectation that something external will be the panacea to their ills, be that government intervention or just waiting for this to pass and things to go back to how they've always been. I don't think that it's going to be a spiritual crisis for people. It's a material crisis, and so whilst it is a great opportunity in that regard, I believe it'll be one that's seized, unfortunately.
No, I agree with that. I can't see it happening. I think you're completely right that the personal rock bottom is needed in order for that understanding that personal change is the answer. Because like you said, people are always looking for the answer outside of them. The government will solve the problem. The corporations will solve the problem.
Yeah.
They'll fix it. We don't have to fix it. And it's actually like, really what this is a wake-up call, or what this should be a wake-up call, is that the personal change is what it's all about. The change starts with you. The buck stops with you. If you change, then society will change.
Absolutely. And that really would be the way out of all kinds of cultural ills, not least the astonishing rate at which we consume our planet's resources. If you're a little more centered, like people tend to be in the fellowship, then your needs do reduce. They just do. It seems to be a natural byproduct of it. I don't know if that's been your experience. My needs have become increasingly simple, Ren, in terms of what I need going on around me to feel, not just content but joyful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself, to be honest. I mean, with everything that I consume, with to do with clothes, to do with food, anything that I can think of is absolutely, definitely reduced. And the one thing that this is actually really highlighted to me, and I said to Adele the other day, it's terrifying how much waste we're producing as a family, because when you're at work all day, you don't really notice, like, you might take the bins out, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week. It's like just an incredible amount of, I mean, obviously we've got a brand new baby, so there's a lot of dirty nappies and all that kind of stuff that's going in the bin, but I'm taking the bins out and I'm just thinking, where is all this going? Like, I've never really taken it into that much consideration. Obviously, it's going into landfills either in this country or going abroad, but it goes into the landfills, and then what happens to it? And we're just one tiny household out of 8 billion.
Indeed, it's staggering. It is absolutely staggering. No two ways about it. I think there's going to come a point, whether it's this crisis or something in the future, where our ability to wantonly consume in the way that we do is just going to come to an end. I don't believe that universal principles allow things to stay in a state of imbalance, which they clearly are at the moment, aren't they, in respect of certainly, Western human societies, that we take out so much more than we put back.
Yeah.
And it's not the case that can continue indefinitely. So one way or another, it is going to stop. It has to.
What would that look like?
I don't know, friend. But it doesn't. Things don't work like that, do they?
No.
States of imbalance cannot be sustained indefinitely.
No.
You can make that statement on the metaphysical plane or as a logical statement. It's also a logical statement, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I mean, the measures are in place to turn it on its head. I mean, if we stopped consuming coal and oil and we went to greener production of electricity, we could turn it around. And the technology is out there. It's just that the powers that be don't allow for it to change because of the money that's involved. I mean, I had a really interesting conversation with a guy for the last podcast who was 44 years sober, and he'd worked in the substance misuse field for pretty much the majority of that time. And he gave a very simplistic view of addiction, which I completely agreed with. And I said, why is it that the world at large, and especially the pharmaceutical companies in the substance misuse field itself, isn't on board with the fact that it's quite simply, the brain is affected by these substances. The brain gets warped by these substances, and it takes 18 months to 4 years of abstinence for the brain to begin to repair itself. I said, what's so difficult to understand about that? And he said, it's nothing to do with the understanding. It's to do with the money that is invested, the trillions of dollars that come out of the drug trade and the alcohol trade.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you're just fighting Goliath. Like there is no chance that those organisations are going to back down. And it seems the same in terms of the environment. How do you fight BP, for example?
It's seemingly an impossible undertaking, isn't it?
Unless we reach a global rock bottom, and this seems to be the problem. I think on the micro level, you've got each individual addict who hits a rock bottom and then is forced to change. And on the macro level, it seems that we are, as a species, we have to do the same thing.
I believe you're correct. Absolutely. Then there's you look at a nation such as China. I mean, there's absolutely no possibility of any change happening there anytime soon, is there? So even if in the West we make the changes that seem to be called for, the emergent dominant economies such as China and India they're not just going to stop their progress, are they?
Well, it's fine. Gone back to business as usual already anyway.
Quite. So it does seem, if not hopeless, then highly unlikely that collectively the changes that are called for will be made, which is a great shame.
Well, I think that the only hope that can be taken out of this really is that when the next one comes, and it will definitely come, whether it's a world war or whether it's the next virus or whatever it may be that creates this global first panic and then a response to that panic, ultimately there's always going to be the phrase that keeps coming to my mind, and I know it's a bit kind of trite, is the meek shall inherit the earth. There's always going to be that small band of individuals who group together, who have, some sort of spiritual life that will continue on, because those that don't have some sort of power to lean back on won't survive.
No, I think that's a good observation, and I think that you read similar literature to me, and there's a lot of talk within contemporary spiritual literature of some kind of split being on the horizon between those that are wholly invested in a kind of reductive, materialistic service to self type of consciousness, and those that have made a transition to a spiritual service to others type of consciousness. I think that's something that the future may hold for us. And there's that old Chinese proverb, isn't there? May you live in interesting times, and we certainly live in interesting times. There's no room for becoming what would I say, bored or disinterested with what's going on. It's certainly, it's unprecedented, isn't it, in fact, what's going on at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, as we touched on in the last conversation, that it's easy to say, and I'm sure that anybody listening to this who's never had the experience will probably think I'm absolutely full of shit, but when you've had the experience of ego death in terms with psychedelics or through meditation or whatever it may be, there does come a peace of mind with it, whereby you accept that life is finite anyway, and whether it ends tomorrow or whether it ends in 30, 40 years' time, ultimately the outcome is the same. And whatever carries on after you're gone, whether it's just a memory of you as a person, or whether it's a soul or whether it's consciousness, whatever it may be. I think that whatever carries on after you, there needs to be this impetus of having meaning and purpose in your life.
Mm-hmm.
To leave some sort of legacy, even if that's just at the basic level of being a good husband or being a good parent or, whatever it may be, being good at your job, being a good person, whatever you leave behind, make it be something positive.
Absolutely. And I note your allusion to ego death and pointing to, that we are inevitably going to perish eventually. And I was reflecting a couple of days back on one of the AA aphorisms, this too shall pass. And I think that's often objectified in the sense of there is currently something unpleasant or unacceptable happening to me that at some time in the future will end and be replaced by something that I prefer, by a higher power. Whereas I think that it points to the reality of our moment-to-moment existence, that every passing moment contains inherently its passing away. So that there is not a single atom in our existence that we can cling to from one moment to the next. And when you went on the Vipassana retreat and on the retreats that I've been on, you can see that process happening in real time, that there really isn't anything substantial that you can cling to. And that can be a prompt for what St. John of the Cross would have described as the dark night of the soul. When you see how transient this moment-to-moment experience is, it can precipitate plunging into depression, as I've seen with people. It's not uncommon. But equally, it can be the most transcendent relief as well, when you just allow things to be as they are right now, knowing directly that they are going to pass away in the same instant that they arise. And that really is a freedom that, in my experience, is unmatched by anything else that I've seen into, investigated, explored, or looked at.
Well, it's a terrifying prospect, isn't it? Because looking the void like square in the face, and recognizing that there isn't anything to cling on to. Like the more you're attached to the material, the more painful life becomes.
Absolutely.
This is the difference between, like you said, the materialists out there who are full of fear, and let's call them, I don't know, the spiritualists who are free of that fear. That is the only difference, is that their attachment to the things that they perceive will make them happy. And it's like, if you can't even imagine that you could survive on rice and beans for the rest of your life, that you have to have the steak that you used to, and the I don't know, the bacon and eggs every morning, and the Domino's pizza takeaways, which I had a lovely one the other night, by the way.
Nice.
If you're absolutely attached to all this materialistic shit that means nothing, then you'll never actually truly be happy, will you? Because if anybody takes those things away from you, all of a sudden, you're miserable.
Indeed. Your contentment is always contingent. It's always contingent upon something else.
Yeah.
Whereas the promise of the spiritual life, if you will, is happiness irrespective of conditions. And that's not that isn't trite, and it's not a pipe dream either. I mean, there really is, as you know, a place that you can get to where that is possible.
Well, I mean, I can honestly say that I have achieved that, and it began 10 years ago when I found myself, free from alcohol for the first time, and I was living in a car in Australia, and I was literally eating rice and beans for my dinner every single night because that was all I could afford. But I was sleeping underneath the stars every night, and I had absolutely no worldly responsibilities apart from driving up and down Australia and buying my next meal. And I've never felt happier in my life. I've never felt more free.
Wow.
At that point in my life, I would say that I'm now as happy as I was then, and now I live in a house and I have a family. But the reason why I've managed to, I wouldn't say hang on to that level of happiness, because certainly it's been up and down over the years. But the reason why I have attained peace of mind on pretty much a daily basis and a level of happiness which doesn't waver that often is simply because it could all be taken away from me right now, and my happiness doesn't depend on it.
No, quite so. And that's the trap that has been fallen into collectively, is the idea that there is something that I have to have in order to be content, and once I have that thing, it'll be the next thing. And it's desire cannot, by definition, be satisfied. It's endless. It's bottomless. It really is.
And desire is the definition of craving, isn't it? I mean, when you come from the lens of an addict as well, who basically their entire life is consumed with craving, from one moment to the next, craving the substance of their choice. You can once you've got some level of abstinence and space away from your addiction, you can really see how that desire it dominates your life.
It does. It's all consuming, and it permeates every aspect of your life, and takes priority over pretty much everything else. And up for part of the recovery process for me really does seem to be a attenuation of what should we say, unhealthy desire generally. It fades away, and what's left is, I suppose, a healthy manifestation of the desire energy needed to sustain your life. I think the step 4 in the 12 by 12 opens with a couple of paragraphs about that very phenomenon, doesn't it? Where it talks about our instincts, he calls them, running out of control, dominating us, and being disproportionate to our actual needs, and bringing them back to something resembling a healthy and reasonable set of desires just to sustain the life is really where we want to be heading.
Well, interestingly enough, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guy that I was listening to was someone that you would that I would consider, prior to the conversation that I heard, I would consider him to be somebody who has walked really far down the spiritual path, is kind of like considered, almost a bit of a spiritual giant, really, in terms of like the self-help kind of movements. And he was having this conversation with his friend, and they'd had a few drinks and they'd had a few spliffs, so they were kind of loose, and they were talking openly. And towards the end of the conversation, he opened up and he said he still feels this ball of anxiety in his chest. He said, I'm still terrified of X, Y, and Z. And his friend said to him, well, I think that really boils down to basically, you've still got fear that you're not going to achieve the things that you need to achieve, right? And the thought that came to me was, it doesn't matter how much meditation you've done, it doesn't matter how many spiritual readings you've done, it doesn't matter how much exercise you do. The one thing that the 12 steps offers that no other spiritual practice offers is the excavation of all your shit. And it takes it puts all that crap that you've done in the past, and it sweeps it away like debris. and it leaves you an open space to fill up with, the cup of whatever you want to call it, spirituality, source, God, whatever. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't been through that process, if you were to sit down in meditation with all that shit swirling around in the background, you would never overcome that fear on your own. You would never overcome those, those issues on your own. So for me, that is actually what is needed, is to go through that entire process.
For sure. And I what I like about the 12 steps in that regard as well is the emphasis on personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Which I've had some amazing experiences in a therapeutic context, which have actually uprooted stuff that the 12 steps didn't reach. But that emphasis on taking responsibility is really powerful. I think I couldn't tell you why, Ren. I don't claim to be an expert on such matters, but it seems to me to be very, very powerful, and perhaps not typically offered elsewhere in similar or like processes.
Well, I think the reason for that is because one of the things that one of my guests said, Arlena, she said one of her mantras is, "It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility." And the process of looking at yourself and especially the step 4 and 5, I think what most traditional forms of therapy don't really encourage, and don't necessarily, in my experience anyway, because I've had a lot of therapy as well, which has been helpful, but what they seem to shy away from is your part in it. So even if you've got this, even if somebody has been horrible towards you, or whatever situation you've been in where this person has massively pissed you off, you've got a huge resentment towards them, and it might be granted, they might have done something really, really horrible towards you. You can always look in that 4th column, you can always look at what your part in it is. And if it's something horrendous like childhood sexual abuse or something like that, where obviously you played no part and, it wasn't your fault at all, but it then enables you to look at what you can still do differently from this point onwards.
Indeed, and I suppose what's come to mind there is it gives us the opportunity to reject the mindset of victim.
Yes.
It's empowering, isn't it? So we acknowledge that in such a situation as childhood abuse, at the time, obviously, there was nothing I could do about it whatsoever, and I was a victim. But in adult life, I can look at it in the way that we're doing and reject the victim mindset that is itself extremely debilitating.
Yeah, and you no longer have to be a victim anymore.
No, that's quite a significant transition to make, because that can haunt you on an unconscious level, I think, and you can continue to attract that kind of dynamic into your sober life if it hasn't been looked at and rejected firmly,
Well, you simply become a martyr because you, on the surface, it looks as though you have, forgotten or forgiven what's happened, but actually you haven't, and you've still got this kind of like burning resentment underlying everything that you do. And you might do something for someone, or just get on with your daily life, but you're always looking for people to say well done, or you just kind of just not getting on with life on life's terms. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, actually, because I'm just conscious of time, I've only got a few minutes, do you have any other addictions now, like as it stands at this point in your life? Is there anything that causes you this, not the same kind of issue as alcohol and drugs did, but is there any recurring habitual patterns that you might have, whether it be to do with food or work or any types of behaviours that either are an issue now or sometimes rear their ugly heads?
When I went on the ayahuasca retreat it was December before last, part of the process was smoking mapachos, which are very strong, almost cigar-like tobacco. And up to that point, I hadn't smoked for 5 years, but I ought to have said no to that particular aspects of the ceremony because I've been a smoker in the past, but I didn't. So I do smoke again, which is a frustration. In terms of does it, obviously it's bad for your health and it's something that I need to address. It doesn't impact on your life in the same way as a drug or drink addiction moment to moment. I don't think it's not the same. It's of a slightly different stripe. In terms of addictive behaviours other than that, yes, I mean that one of the reasons that I went to the ayahuasca retreat, Rem, was because of compulsive sexual behaviour, I would say. I'm pleased to report that is no longer the issue that it was. What has been asked of me is to allow that to express itself healthily, and that's been a process throughout my recovery, my relationship with sex, Ren, and it is a work in progress for sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of compulsively indulging in sexual activity that was harmful to me, no, that's no longer the case. Work-wise, I would say it's not addictive behaviour per se, but it's on the spectrum. But it's not from overindulging in it. It's from not engaging with it as fully as I might through fear of failure. And that has not just affected my 9-to-5 career. Notwithstanding that I started a business and it was reasonably successful for a number of years, albeit it's very quiet at the moment, it still wasn't, I wouldn't consider that being the actualization of my potential. So this is a phase of my life that I'm entering into now, is to try and fulfill my potential, Ren, in much the way that you do, actually. I do, speaking, I'm not blowing the smoke up your arse here, but what you do is the actions of a self-actualized person, if you look at sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's you know, I admire that. Food, not really. No, I mean, I enjoy sweet stuff occasionally, but I don't compulsively eat it. Let's see. I suppose failure to create and sustain lasting, meaningful friendships was an issue. Through, I suppose, a deep-rooted fear of vulnerability and intimacy, but that is something that has radically changed over the last 18 months, 2 years or so, precipitated, as it happens, by the pain of the split from my ex and opening up to other people more fully than I ever had before. So I know these are not sort of classic addictions as such, but they're on that spectrum, aren't they, of behaviours that we associate with people with addictive tendencies. So yeah, I think that's a high level summary. Great, good, you know, tremendous progress made, but obviously it's all a work in progress, Ren, and it will be till the day I'm pushing daisies, man.
Having spoken to enough old timers now, you know, those up in the kind of 20s, 30s, and 40 years of sobriety, and have been obviously working on themselves for that amount of time, and also referring back to the comment I made on the last podcast about Ram Dass, who said in his 50 years of of spiritual seeking. He hasn't lost any of his neuroses.
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion that it's more about acceptance of self, and I think in that self acceptance comes the ability to be able to change and to be able to kind of overcome these neuroses and behaviors and I make those little changes. But the key ingredient for me, which is I'm convinced that I'm a very slow learner, because obviously I've had this thrown in my face for 10 years and it's only really coming to the fore as to how important it is. But it's honesty. If you can talk openly and be vulnerable about what it is that you're struggling with, and just own it, and for me the big one, I've spoken about it a lot on the podcast, but for me the big one has been chocolate, food, sugar as a broad umbrella, but mainly chocolate. If I had to boil it down, I'd say that is the one that I'll eat it compulsively, I'll eat it on the sly. Like if it's in the fridge and I think I really want some, I'll take it. It's all those really shameful behaviors that used to come with drinking alcohol are very, very similar when it comes to chocolate with me. And it might sound ridiculous to some, but it can be very, very debilitating. But as I've started to become more honest about it now and just open up and talk about it, I'm craving chocolate, or I want to go to the shop and buy some, or whatever it may be. It's seeming that I'm having a much better result in being able to just say no to it. And I'm not eating it half as much as I used to be. And there are, I think, people, and I relate to what you said about the sexual gratification as well. There's always going to be certain behaviors that people keep hidden because they're ashamed of what it is that they're doing, or the way that they're going about doing it. And I think that is what keeps us in the everlasting cycle of addiction. And if you take that to the broader society as a whole, we're not having an open and honest conversation about where we're at. As individuals, as community members, and the more we do open up about our fears and we pull together, the better we will be at overcoming these types of crises.
Completely agree. I think that's a very astute observation, actually. Very astute observation.
We'll leave it there then.
Thanks very much for listening. If you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see links to a range of mutual aid organisations underneath the podcast link. And please don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. And you can also support the podcast now via Patreon at www.patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. And you can donate anything you like, really. A couple of £, £10 a month, whatever you feel that the podcast is worth to you. Is it worth a cup of coffee? So yeah, anything would really, really help to market the podcast and spread the word of recovery far and wide. Please visit www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for my books and social media links. And if you'd like to get in touch, email me, rencoy@lifeinrecovery.co.uk. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.